My name is Lauren Bennett. I'm 29, and this is the story of how one quiet dinner with my family made me finally walk away from the role they written for me since I was old enough to pour my own cereal. If you enjoy real-life stories like mine, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what happens next. I wish I could say I didn't see it coming. That what happened at that dinner table was some sudden explosion, some unpredictable moment that flipped everything upside down. But the truth is, the ground had been shaking under my feet for years. We were all just pretending the cracks weren't there. I pulled into my parents' driveway just after 5. Their house looked exactly the same as it did when I was 15. White paneling, navy shutters, a porch light that flickered no matter how many times I changed the bulb. Familiar in that heavy way childhood homes can be warm until you re-inside long enough to remember why you left. Before I even stepped out of the car, I saw my sister's SUV parked sideways across the line, like parallel parking was a suggestion she didn't have to follow. A small thing, but that's how it always started, with her little exceptions that grew into entire lifestyles. Inside, the smell of rosemary and brown butter wrapped around me. My mom was in the kitchen, brushing a glaze over the turkey like it was a fragile piece of art. She looked up just long enough to smile. "Oh, good, sweetheart, you're here. Can you check the rolls in the oven? I forgot the timer again." "No, hello. Just duty. I didn't take it personally, that was our rhythm." "Yeah," I said, slipping off my coat. "I've got it." My dad was already at the head of the dining table, reading something on his phone with his glasses perched at the tip of his nose.
He didn't look up when he said, "Did you bring the casserole?" I blinked. "Hi, Dad. Yes, it's in the car."
"I'll grab it." "Good." He nodded, satisfied. "Your sister can't really cook. Not her talent." There it was. The warm-up. My sister Elisa was sprawled in one of the dining chairs, scrolling through her phone like she was managing a Fortune 500 company instead of a curated Instagram feed. She gave me a little wave. "Hey," she said, tone flat. "Cute sweater." The table looked like something out of a holiday magazine: candles, cloth napkins, the whole setup. My mom always tried her best to make things nice, and I always tried my best to keep them that way. But there was a strange tension in the air, a heaviness that didn't belong. Dinner started the usual way: polite comments about the weather, updates on work, Alyssa talking about a brand gifting her skincare products. I cut my turkey into small pieces, spacing them evenly around my plate, something I always did when I was nervous, even though I pretended I wasn't tea. Then my dad set his knife down. The soft clink of metal against china cut through the room. "Before we go any further," he said, clearing his throat, "I want to say something." Mom froze. Alyssa perked up like praise was incoming. I felt my stomach tighten. "Your sister has had an incredible year," he continued, lifting his wine glass toward her. "She was born to live soft, always had that touch. Some people just do." The words slid across the table like something sticky. Alyssa smiled, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "Dad," he kept going. "And Lauren, well, you've always been the dependable one." He nodded like that was all I ever needed to hear. "You make the money, you keep things steady. Not everyone gets to live easy. You understand that?" My mom's eyes darted between us. "Your father just means you're reliable, honey. Strong." Dad leaned back and wiped his hands on his napkin. And then he said it. The sentence that sounded rehearsed, like he'd been waiting for the right moment. "If you've got a problem with that, Lauren, there's the door." No heat. No anger, just a simple statement, placed neatly between the stuffing and the cranberry sauce. The room went still. Alyssa looked down at her plate, hiding a smirk. Mom stared at the centerpiece like she wished it could swallow her. And me? Something inside me clicked, not loudly, not dramatically. More like the last turn of a lock that had been rusting for years. I set my fork down gently, wiped my mouth, and folded my napkin with slow, steady hands. Then I looked at my father, this man who had spent my whole life treating me like the scaffolding holding up his favorite child, and I said, very softly, "Then I guess you won't be needing my help anymore." His brows pulled together. "What does that mean?" I stood. My chair scraped quietly against the floor, but the sound felt enormous. "You'll understand soon," Mom whispered my name like a question. Alyssa stared like she was watching something she hadn't predicted, and I walked out. No yelling. No dramatic exits. Just walking out the front door into the cold air that suddenly felt cleaner than anything inside that house. When people ask what changed in me that night, they expect it to be one moment. Driving away from my parents' house that night, the road felt strangely familiar. Not because of the turns or the streetlights or the same patches of cracked pavement I'd grown up with, but because the feeling in my chest wasn't new at all. It was old, ancient even. Like something that had been waiting for me to listen. People think breaking points arrive suddenly, in a big, dramatic flash. But mine arrived on the slowest train imaginable, one that had been inching toward me since childhood. The first memory that always comes back is from when I was 9. I had spent weeks building a miniature suspension bridge for the school's STEAM fair. I'd sanded down every single popsicle stick until it was smooth, and I reinforced every joint with glue so it could actually hold weight. I was so proud of it. I remember carrying it through the front door like it was a gold medal. Dad glanced at it once and said, "Good job. Now go help your sister with her craft project." Elisa, my sister, had finger-painted a swirl of purple and pink blobs. My mom framed it that night and hung it in the hallway like it was the first sign of a prodigy. My bridge went on a shelf in the garage where it collected dust until the humidity warped the wood and it fell apart. High school wasn't any different. I worked weekends at my parents' accounting office filing papers, answering emails, learning QuickBooks before I even learned how to parallel park. Alyssa took photography classes, tried pottery, joined a dance group, and quit all 3 within a month. And somehow each time she quit, she was finding herself. When I brought home straight A's, Dad would just say, "Good, keep it up." But when Alyssa brought home a B- in ceramics, he kissed the top of her head and said, "Grades don't measure creativity." I learned early that achievement wasn't the currency in our house, adoration was. And it seemed like Alyssa had an unlimited account. College just widened the gap even more. I paid my own tuition with scholarships, financial aid, 2 part-time jobs, and a level of exhaustion I didn't even tell my friends about. Meanwhile, my parents pulled money from their savings to send Elisa to a private art program because, as they said, she needs room to explore. I visited home less and less, but every time I did, it was the same script. "Lauren, can you look at these bills? Lauren, can you help your sister update her portfolio? Lauren, your sister needs more art materials, you're the practical one, can you handle it?" The part that stings the most now is how natural it all felt back then. Like I was trained for it, conditioned to be the responsible one. But things started to change after college. I got a solid job in project management, then a promotion. I moved into my own apartment. I met people who treated me like my time actually mattered. For the first time in my life, I had enough money to breathe, to save, to plan my own future. And that's when the phone calls started. At first, it was small things. "Could you spot us this month?" Or, "Your sister's art show ran over budget, can you help cover it?" They were framed as little emergencies that sounded urgent and temporary. But temporary problems have a way of stretching out when there's someone willing to fix them. I became the fixer. The safety net, the she-handle-it daughter. And somewhere along the way, my parents stopped asking with gratitude and started asking like it was expected of me. One memory hits harder than all the others. 2 years ago, my dad invited me to a family meeting at the house. I drove over thinking something serious had happened, a health issue, a major financial crisis, anything that would require all of us to sit down and talk like adults. Instead, they sat me down and announced they wanted to help Alyssa open an art studio. I remember the way they said it like it was a declaration, not a discussion. "She has so much talent," my mom said, her eyes glossy with hope. "She just needs a little boost," Dad added, sliding a folder across the table toward me. Inside was a full business plan. I recognized some of it immediately. I had made half of the templates in it because I had shown my dad how to use them the year before. They wanted me to invest. Not a loan, not a gift. A family contribution, $10,000. I just looked at them and told them I didn't have that kind of extra money. My dad didn't even miss a beat before saying, "Well, maybe if you budgeted better." I remember just sitting there, completely numb. wondering how he could say that to the daughter who'd been paying more bills than Alyssa ever had in her entire life. In the end, I transferred $3,000. Guilt has a way of making you feel responsible for things that should never have been your burden to carry. Alyssa's studio closed in 8 months. They never mentioned the money again. So when my father said at dinner that night, "Your sister was born to live soft," it wasn't new. It was simply the first time he'd said out loud what his actions had been screaming for years. I wasn't the daughter. I was the infrastructure. The support beam holding up their dreams for someone else. Driving home that night, the city lights blurred past my windows, and for the first time, I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel angry either. I felt awake, like something in me had finally snapped into place. All those years of being the steady one, the reliable one, the fixer, it wasn't kindness on their part, it was conditioning. And for so long, I had mistaken my loyalty for love. By the time I pulled into my apartment's parking lot, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. If my family had assigned us roles, then I was finally done playing mine. When I walked into my apartment that night, everything felt sharper. The hum of the refrigerator, the click of the hallway light, even the faint smell of the vanilla candle I'd forgotten to blow out before leaving. It was like the world had been on low volume for years, and someone suddenly decided to turn the dial back to normal. My boyfriend Evan was on the couch with his laptop open, editing photos from a wedding shoot he'd done last week. The screen cast a soft glow across his face, but the second he heard the door close, he looked up. "You're home early," he said gently, because he already knew. He always knew. I hung my coat on the corner of a chair instead of the hook, something I only did when my mind was somewhere else. "Dinner went about how you'd expect," I said, toeing off my shoes. He closed his laptop without even asking. "Bad?" I let out a breath, the kind that leaves you smaller afterward. "Bad enough." He didn't push. Evan never pushed. That's part of why being with him always felt so different from being with my family. He gave me room to talk instead of shoving expectations into my hands like they were grocery bags. I sat next to him, pulling my knees up slightly. He said Elisa was born to live soft, and that I'm the one built for the work. And if I didn't like it, I paused, swallowing hard. "There's the door." Evan's jaw tightened. It wasn't dramatic, just that little shift people do when they're trying not to react too strongly. He said that? I nodded. Like it was obvious. Like I should have known my place already. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't heavy, though. It felt clarifying. It felt like everything was finally coming into focus. "So, what do you want to do?" he finally asked. It was the gentlest question in the world, and somehow the most important one I'd ever been asked. No one in my family had ever asked me what I wanted. They just told me what I had to do. I leaned my head back against the couch and just stared at the ceiling for a bit. "I don't want to keep doing this," I said quietly. "I don't want to fund their emergencies and pretend it's normal. I don't want to be the responsible one they rely on every single time Alyssa makes another mistake. I'm so tired of being the solution to problems I didn't create." Evan nodded slowly, his eyes full of understanding. "So stop." I closed my eyes. "It's not that simple, isn't it?" he asked. "You're not obligated to take care of people who don't take care of you." He wasn't wrong. Of course he wasn't. But it still felt so foreign to hear it said out loud, to have that thought validated by someone else. For years, I'd been conditioned to believe that my purpose was to be the family's safety net, no matter the cost to me. I got up from the couch and walked over to my desk. I opened my laptop, and the screen lit up my living room, casting a dim reflection across the window. It felt symbolic in a way, like this was the moment I finally decided to stop letting things stay blurry and out of focus. My financial folders were exactly where I always kept them, labeled, color-coded, painfully organized. The first file was titled Family Support. I clicked it. Every single transfer ID made in the past 4 years was logged right there in a spreadsheet. Mortgage payments for their house, debt consolidation loans, last-minute supply orders for Elisa's failed photography studio, utility bills they needed covered just until things get stable again, the emergency loan for my parents' property taxes 2 summers ago. It was all there, a neat, tidy record of my own slow drain. I stared at the totals. The number at the very bottom of the spreadsheet made my stomach twist, not out of regret, but out of sheer shock that I had allowed myself to ignore it for so long. It was staggering. "You okay?" Evan asked from across the room. His voice was soft, not wanting to break my concentration.
Yeah, I said, my voice a little shaky.
I didn't realize how much I'd been doing, but I had realized. Deep down, I just hadn't wanted to admit it to myself. Admitting it would mean I had to do something about it, and that was the scariest part. I opened my bank app. All the automatic transfers were there, recurring, scheduled, silent. Quietly paying for my parents' mortgage, for their electric bill, for the business credit card that Alyssa had full access to, spending money I worked so hard to earn. They were invisible responsibilities passed down to me like unwanted heirlooms. I hovered my cursor over the cancel option for the first transfer. My hand shook, not from fear, but from adrenaline. A rush of something powerful, something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Evan walked over and leaned on the back of my chair, a silent, supportive presence. "You don't owe them your stability," he said, his voice firm but kind. He was right. I clicked. Mortgage autopay canceled. The business supply line of credit revoked. Shared credit card access removed. Each click felt like loosening a rope that I hadn't even realized was tied so tightly around my ribs, constricting my breath. Click, click, freedom. Next, I opened a new email. My hands didn't tremble anymore. They were steady. The adrenaline had been replaced by a quiet, solid resolve. Subject: ending my financial involvement. Body: effective immediately. I am ending all financial contributions and removing myself from any shared accounts. Please update any future arrangements accordingly. Lauren. That was it. No long, drawn-out explanation, no guilt trip, no apology for reclaiming my own life. Just a simple, undeniable statement of fact. This was a business transaction and I was closing the account. I hovered the mouse over the send button. This was the final step, the point of no return. "Ready?" Evan asked. I nodded, even though a small part of me was still screaming in panic. But the truth was, I'd already left that dinner table. I'd already walked out their front door for the last time as their personal bank. This was just the paperwork. I clicked send. The message whooshed away into the digital void, and suddenly the room felt wider. Taller, brighter, the air itself felt lighter. Evan wrapped an arm around my shoulders and pressed a soft kiss to the side of my head. "I'm proud of you," he whispered. I leaned my head against him, letting his warmth seep into me. For the first time in what felt like forever, my body felt unclenched. The constant tension I carried in my shoulders and my jaw was just gone. The next morning, I woke up without that usual tightness in my chest, that familiar sense of dread about what new crisis would pop up today. I got dressed for work. I made myself a proper cup of coffee, and for once I didn't compulsively check my phone to see if my parents needed something. I didn't even think about them until my phone started ringing at exactly 9:47 a.m. It was my dad. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, it rang again. My mom, voicemail. Then a text from Elisa. "What did you do?" And then she called. One after another, like a chain reaction I had finally set off. I didn't answer. I just silenced my phone and put it in my bag. Because for the first time in my entire life, they would have to figure things out without me. The first voicemail came before I even finished my morning coffee. Dad's voice, clipped and irritated. "Lauren, the mortgage payment bounced. Call me back. We need to handle this." No hello. No acknowledgement of the email I'd sent, the one that explained everything. No recognition that I was no longer part of the system he built around my reliability. Just an order. I deleted it without listening to the rest. A small, simple tap on a screen felt like a monumental act of defiance. The second call came less than an hour later. It was Mom. Her tone was soft, trembling at the edges the way it always got when she wanted me to fix something quietly, to smooth things over without a fuss. "Sweetheart, your father's stressed. Things are a bit tight this month. Could you just cover the payment this once? We'll sort it out next time. I promise." She said this once so many times over the years it had lost all meaning. It was her go-to phrase, a verbal bandage she slapped over every financial wound they inflicted on themselves. expecting me to be the suture underneath. I didn't delete her voicemail. I archived it. There's a difference. Deleting feels angry. Archiving feels like a boundary. A quiet declaration that the message was received, but the request was denied. By lunchtime, Elisa called too. I didn't pick up. I knew what it would be, but the voicemail that came through was even more audacious than I'd imagined. Her voice was sing-songy, confident, completely oblivious. Hey, Laure, so we're planning a relaunch for the studio, like a comeback, you know? It's gonna be huge. I need you to send $5,000 to secure the new space. It's a prime location. I'll even put your name on the flyer or whatever as a sponsor. Call me. I actually laughed. Out loud, alone in my quiet office, I just laughed. It wasn't because it was funny, but because it was so painfully predictable. It was the same pattern, the same entitlement, wrapped in slightly different packaging. Every family crisis, every one of Alyssa's failed ventures, every overspent month always circled back to one core assumption. Lauren will fix it. Lauren will pay. Lauren will absorb the impact. This time, the assumption was going to shatter against a wall of silence. That afternoon, I turned my phone on Do Not Disturb and focused on my work. It shocked me how much energy I suddenly had. Not the jittery, overstretched, caffeine-fueled energy I was used to, the kind that came from constantly being on alert for the next disaster. This was real focus, real presence. I was able to dive into my projects at the gallery, finalizing details for the upcoming winter exhibit. For the first time in years, my mind wasn't split in two, one half on my career, the other half acting as my family's emergency financial hotline. Boundaries, it turns out, make space. They clear out the mental clutter you didn't even realize was suffocating you. Around 3 p.m., I took a break and walked through the nearly completed exhibit. The quiet hum of the new lighting system, the soft echo of my footsteps on the polished concrete floor, it all felt so grounding, so peaceful. I stopped in front of my favorite installation. It was a series of suspended glass panels, each one etched differently, arranged so that your reflection fractured depending on where you stood. From one angle, you were whole. From another, you were scattered into a dozen uneven, shimmering pieces. Looking at myself there, fragmented and distorted, I thought, for once, this actually looks like an honest version of me. A version who'd finally stopped cleaning up other people's messes. A version who didn't automatically bend every single time someone asked. A version who was learning, slowly but surely, that love shouldn't be equated with obligation. For so long, I believed my value in my family was tied directly to my bank account. The more I gave, the more I was loved. But it wasn't love. It was a transaction. And I was done paying. By the time I left work that day, the missed calls had piled up into a wall of angry red notifications. 8 from Dad, 4 from Mom, 3 from Alyssa. A small part of me, the old me, felt a pang of anxiety. But the new me, the one who was building boundaries, felt a sense of calm. I didn't open a single one. I didn't listen to a single voicemail. Their panic was no longer my responsibility. That night, I went home to the apartment I shared with Evan. An apartment that was entirely mine, in a life that was finally becoming my own. We made dinner together, a simple pasta dish, and it felt like a feast. We watched a documentary about deep-sea creatures, and I laughed at something he said about the narrator's overly dramatic voice. It was a normal, quiet evening. And somewhere between washing the dishes and brushing my teeth, it hit me. My life felt quiet. Not empty, quiet. For as long as I could remember, silence from my family meant I had done something wrong. It was a punishment, a prelude to a guilt trip. But this silence, the one I had chosen, was different. This wasn't the silence of disapproval. It was the silence of peace. For the first time, it didn't feel like punishment. It felt like freedom. The absence of their constant demands, the absence of their manufactured emergencies. It was like taking a deep, clean breath after being underwater for too long. The next day, the calls started again, but they were different, more frantic. Dad left a message that was just a string of furious, half-finished sentences about disrespect and family duty. Mom's voice was pleading, telling me Alyssa was heartbroken and that I was tearing the family apart. Alyssa sent a flurry of texts, alternating between insults about how selfish I was and passive-aggressive comments about how she'd just have to give up on her dreams again. It was a full-scale emotional assault, designed to wear me down, to trigger the guilt that had been programmed into me since childhood. But something had shifted. Their words still stung, but they didn't penetrate. They were like arrows hitting a shield. I could see the manipulation for what it was, a desperate attempt to pull me back into my old role. Instead of responding, I went for a run. I focused on the rhythm of my feet hitting the pavement, the cool air filling my lungs. I was running away from nothing. I was running toward myself. When I got back, I saw a new email. It wasn't from my family. It was from the lead curator at the gallery, praising my work on the winter exhibit and mentioning a potential promotion to a senior curatorial position. I sat there, looking at the email, the missed calls on my phone screen, a stark contrast. On one side, a world of chaos, blame, and endless need. On the other, a world of opportunity, respect, and personal growth. The choice had never been clearer. My sister was born to live soft, they said. Maybe she was, but I was born to live free. And I was finally starting. It took 3 days. 3 whole days for the frantic calls to stop, and for them to finally show up in person. Evan and I had just finished breakfast when a firm, impatient knock rattled the apartment door. I didn't even need to look through the peephole. In my entire life, only one person knocked like that. Evan's voice was quiet beside me. "Do you want me to get it?" I shook my head, my resolve hardening. "No, this is mine." I took a deep breath and pulled the door open. There they were. My parents, standing shoulder to shoulder, bundled in thick coats like they'd just bolted out of the house without a second thought. My mom's eyes were already glossy with unshed tears. My dad looked exhausted truly, deeply tired, but his jaw was set in that familiar stubborn line. "Lauren," he said, his voice rough, completely skipping any sort of greeting. "We need to talk." I stepped aside, holding the door open for them to enter. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Evan retreat to the kitchen, giving us space, but staying close enough to be a silent support. My mom immediately sank onto the couch, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. "Sweetheart," she began, her voice trembling, "we're behind. The business account is frozen. The mortgage." Her words trailed off into a choked sob. "I know," I said, my voice surprisingly soft but firm. "I warned you this would happen." Dad's mouth tightened into a thin line. "You blindsided us, Lauren. We relied on you." "I know," I said again, meeting his gaze without flinching. "You relied on me so much you forgot that I didn't actually owe you everything." He opened his mouth, ready to fire back with some guilt-laced argument, but for the first time in my life, I held up a hand to stop him. The small gesture hung in the air between us, a symbol of a massive shift. "Dad, listen." My voice didn't shake, and that alone felt like a monumental victory. "I have supported this family for years. Not because you asked nicely, but because I was raised to believe it was my non-negotiable job." "It is your job," he said, the words automatic, a conditioned response. "Family pulls together." "No," I said quietly, the word cutting through his defense. "Family supports each other. What we had wasn't support. It was dependence. And it was all on me." A heavy silence filled the small apartment. My mom just wiped her eyes, staring down at her lap, unable to look at me. My dad looked at me like he was seeing a stranger for the first time, and he clearly didn't like what he saw. Alyssa's absence in that moment spoke volumes. Of course, she didn't show up. In her world, this family crisis had nothing to do with her. She wasn't programmed to worry about things until her own comfort was directly threatened. This was my problem to fix, just like it had always been. My mom finally broke the silence, her voice a barely audible whisper. "We didn't realize how much you were carrying." "I know," I said, the words laced with a sad sort of finality. "But you didn't try to realize either. You were comfortable not knowing." My dad rubbed his forehead, the picture of a man cornered. "So what now? You're just walking away, abandoning us." I took a long, slow breath, feeling the air fill my lungs for what felt like the first time. "No, I'm setting a boundary. I am not responsible for your bills anymore. I am not your emergency fund. I am not the family's foundation. I love you both, but I'm done playing a role that is slowly killing me. My mom started crying again. Not the loud, dramatic sobs she used for effect, but quiet, defeated tears, like air slowly leaking from a balloon. My dad didn't cry, but I saw something in his expression crack. A tiny shift. A flicker of recognition. Maybe it was even guilt. He looked away, his gaze falling on the floor. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and gravelly. We'll figure it out. He paused, then added, I don't like it. But we will. For the first time in my life, that wasn't a threat. It was a concession. An acceptance. They left as quietly as they had arrived. When the door clicked shut behind them, I let out a breath I felt like I'd been holding for 29 years. The tension in my shoulders eased, and I leaned back against the doorframe, suddenly weak. Evan was there in an instant, wrapping his arms around me from behind, his chin resting on my shoulder. You did it, he murmured into my ear. Yeah, I whispered, a real smile touching my lips. I did, and the honest truth is, it didn't feel like I was losing a family. It felt like I was finally gaining myself. In the months that followed, things changed, slowly but surely. My parents struggled at first, of course. They stumbled. But eventually they adapted. They downsized the business, cut all the unnecessary costs they'd been bleeding for years. And in the most shocking development of all, they actually started holding Alyssa accountable for her own life. Our family isn't perfect now. We might never be. There are still awkward silences and moments of resentment. But we're honest. And that raw honesty is worth more than all the years of forced smiles and unspoken obligations we had before. I am still learning what family really means when it isn't built on a foundation of duty. I am still figuring out what love looks like when it's not something you have to constantly earn. But I know this much for sure. Family should never, ever cost you your entire self. And the moment you stop paying that impossible price is the moment you finally get to live. Thanks for listening. If this story resonated with you, hit that subscribe button and join our community.